Welcome to Agile Clips, where we break down Agile into manageable pieces. In this episode, we interview Andrew Webster. Andrew discusses the key topics in the book, Making Work Visible, Exposing Time Theft to Optimize Work and Flow. He goes on to discuss practical techniques for dealing with unplanned work in Scrum and estimating business value for prioritizing initiatives and features. Hi, Andrew. Thank you for joining us. We're so happy to have you as a guest.
Thank you, Steve.
We would love it if you could introduce yourself.
By all means, I'd love to. My name is Andrew Webster. I describe myself still as an enterprise Agile coach, although I do a lot of work that's sort of not strictly canon Agile. I've added to the sort of range of usual Agile coaching knowledge, techniques, and approaches with things like Cynefin and systems thinking and all kinds of interesting stuff. And really all of it is driven by a desire to improve people's lot at work and improve the quality of their work. I often say when people who are sort of not in our industry ask me what it is that I do, I explain that I help people know what to do when they don't know what to do.
That's a great way of putting it. Yeah.
Right.
I think that covers almost 80 or 90%. Andrew, I think I remember you reviewing one of the books that you really liked, and I think it was something about the making work visible. Can you just elaborate a little bit more about what do you mean by making work visible, and what does that book tell you?
Absolutely. Well, the book is called exactly that, Making Work Visible. Its subtitle is Exposing Time Theft to Optimize Work and Flow by Dominica de Grandis. And I was particularly drawn to this because what it's talking about, she describes the 5 thieves of time. And initially you might think, well, what's that got to do with any of this stuff?
Mm-hmm.
But one of the very simple things that I like to point out to people early on as they're getting used to the whole idea of Agile is that, the whole point of being in any form of business, of really being part of any organization, is that you're trying to achieve something. You're trying to create something of value. Mm-hmm. And the value doesn't actually show up until it's finished, right? And so the quicker you can actually validate your assumptions of what is valuable, what's beneficial, what's useful, the better. If it takes you a very long time to validate your assumptions and you get there and you discover that, the market has moved on or whatever, that's, it's terrible. It's a real waste. So a book that's specifically about being able to actually identify how you lose time, how you waste time, and some strategies for doing something about it appealed to me hugely. And sure enough, good Lord, I read ridiculous amounts of books. I tend to say I read them so other people don't have to. But this has become one of my absolute favorites. And in short, the 5 thieves of time that Dominica proposes are these. 1, too much work in progress.
Yeah.
2, unknown dependencies. 3, unplanned work.
Mm-hmm.
4, conflicting priorities. And 5, neglected work.
I think the last one is a lot more something that I have not come across as frequently, but it does make sense.
Well, exactly. What she points out is that neglected work, either it's sitting there effectively as sort of, how else could you describe it? Stock. Mm-hmm. It's work that's just sat in progress. You've invested something into it, not finished it. Or worse yet, it's actually technical debt.
Correct.
And technical debt is often just interpreted as just stuff you haven't gone back to and finished. It's got a much more precise definition than that. Technical debt is the additional cost of adding new features. And right. If you've actually left your code base, your technology in a mess because you rushed it out the door, and now you want to add something else to it, Well, let's say you think that by adding something to your product, you'll make $1 million. But when you take a look at it, you're going to have to spend $3.5 million just fixing up the back end so that you can do the work to make that extra $1 million. Oops, you're probably going out of business.
And your end user doesn't care about that.
And your end user doesn't care. They just see you go out of business. And I mean, we've all got stories about organizations we've been involved with that have had to sort of drop everything and spend 3 months or 6 months working on the back end.
Yeah.
And all of that time is other missed opportunities. Yet, it's one of the easiest things that slide past us. If there's pressure from above to get the work out the door, it's really easy to do that, and to do that at the cost of quality. And quality isn't just a luxury. The way we're talking about it, actually making sure that you don't have to come back and touch that piece of code again, unless it's to provide some improvement that is actually requested. That's pretty fundamental to what we do. But I love how she calls it out. It's just neglected work. So let's take a look at some of the others. I mean, the first one that she calls out, too much work in progress. She kind of has that be like, the ringleader of these thieves of time. And what she means by too much work in progress is work that started but not yet been finished, right? And I mean, there's all kinds of problems with that.
I mean, that could be like poor definition of done.
It could be poor definition of done. It can easily be, well, what's a good example? One of the things that she calls out is that we're all human. And as humans, we're very much organized around wanting to sort of fit in and be well regarded by our peers and to keep ourselves, safe, in good shape. We hate to risk maybe being humiliated or being, heaven forbid, fired. And so it's terribly easy to just say yes to work. And if that work is invisible, it's tucked away in your system somewhere, it's really hard to, argue for, well, actually, I've got my plate full already. If I say yes to what you're asking me for, maybe we're going to have to take some work off my plate so that I can actually pretty much guarantee that I'm going to finish what you're asking me for.
Right.
And that's just the problem, that every time you start something, if there is other work in progress, you're delaying that work in progress.
Right.
And this is a terrible habit that we see in business, that people get excited about things and they want to make a start. Well, as we said at the top of this, the value doesn't happen at the start. The value happens when you finish.
Yep.
So it really points to this big principle of, rather than trying to think, how can we get all of this work done, instead thinking, how much can we leave out and do the highest value part of it soonest, which is great, because that then has you start to think about, well, what on earth do we actually mean by value?
Right. I think that's the thing that they always say about stop starting, start finishing.
Yeah, stop starting, start finishing. Exactly.
But also the art of the work not done.
Exactly. I mean, we go back to the dear old Agile Manifesto, God bless it. Simplicity, the art of work not done.
Not done, right?
Yes. Right. I mean, if you want to look at the sort of cost-benefit ratio, if you don't do some work, it costs nothing. And as we all know, divide by zero is infinity. So it's very high-value work if you don't do it, right?
Yeah.
So, that's the core of the problem of having too much work in progress. Yeah. And, as she works through the book, what she points out is that everything else, all of the other thieves of time, are thieves in themselves, but they also contribute to additional work in progress. So, for example, number 2, unknown dependencies. There are 3 types of dependency. There's dependency upon work. You're waiting for another piece of work to be done before you can start your piece of work. There's dependency upon people. In other words, they have skills or authority that you need to make progress. And then there's dependency upon resources. Do you have the correct access to the correct domain? Do you have the right tools to do something?
Yeah, maybe that domain is not available right away.
Yeah, exactly. Like Now, when I was reading about this, I was reminded a colleague of mine who still works at one of the Bay Area's very large financial services companies was telling me how they'd done some work and identified one of the biggest sources of delay for them was lack of meeting rooms.
Wow.
Yep. Because what was happening was, of course, you need to make a decision about something and you go to book a meeting room and it's not available today. It's not available next week. It's actually not available until, 3 weeks on Thursday. So you book the room and now you're waiting. So what do? You start something else.
Yeah.
And then you need to book a meeting for that.
Not just for that. Right.
And you can't get a meeting room, and then what do? You book, and so on, and so on, and so on. And so at this particular company, they were trying to have meeting rooms be only bookable by particular teams. Well, I've been paying a lot of attention to this for a client I'm working with at the moment. And in my researches around all of that, I found two fascinating things that almost universally, when you really pay attention to what is slowing organizations down, lack of meeting rooms and senior people's calendars are the two biggest sources of delay.
Yeah.
Just extraordinary. And, we all know that there are resolutions to that. If you can actually organize your workspace into team rooms with teams in them, some common space where serendipitous meetings can happen, some small private space for pairing or for private phone calls, and some small space for people who must have their own offices, people who are working things in legal and HR where there needs to be some privacy. That kind of works brilliantly. And funnily enough, if you look into it, you'll find that there's a lot of research being done that basically proves that. And when it looks at the common alternative, which is having open plan offices, none of the research says anything other than that it's terrible. I saw one piece of work that said that you could argue that it actually causes a drop of efficiency at work of between 40 and 70%. Huge.
Yeah, and then they said people avoid coming to the office.
Yes. I mean, you put people into open plan, they'll stick on headphones and work alone.
Yeah.
It's just extraordinary. So I was presenting this to somebody a while back, and they were like, well, there's got to be some benefits to open plan. So I was like, well, that's a good point. And I Googled benefits of open plan offices. All of the top responses that I got were from modular office system buyers. And it's just one of those things where what's happened is it's become, the norm. And when you're looking at refitting your office, like with so many things we stumble across, people only pay attention to the immediate cost. They look at cost per square foot. Mm-hmm. They don't realize that they're missing the 40 to 70% reduction in efficiency.
Yep.
And I mean, when you look at it's been a while since I've looked at this, but 5 years ago, in the Bay Area, and I know that's extreme, but in the Bay Area, a small team's run rate was calculated at $1 million a year. That's what it costs to keep them in their seats working.
Yeah.
So if they're running at a 70% drop in efficiency, you're losing $700,000 because you put them in open plan. Was that worth saving $4 per square foot? When you start to look at the thief of time, you see how it opens up all of these little corridors to follow, these threads to pull on, So unplanned work, that was number 3. Unplanned work, oh gosh, I mean, this is a bit trickier because for some people it is in the nature of their work that it is unplanned. So, I mean, we've learnt that there are ways of dealing with that you can actually make sure that people pay a lot of attention to the actual urgency and importance of unplanned work, that people start to question its business value so that decisions can be made that if it has to, displace planned work, then great.
It's like a class of service kind of thing.
It is like a class of service. And sure enough, I mean, that's actually really what she suggests that you do, is that you put in a little bit of work into tracking your unplanned work.
Exactly.
So that you can, there are strategies that we know that you can use for handling it. If you're using Scrum, and you want to be able to plan a sprint, but you know that there's an amount of unplanned work that could turn up, sure, you just reduce your capacity, commit to less,
Yeah.
but make sure that you've got the top of your backlog in good shape.
Yeah, so that you can pull.
You can pull. I've seen teams who keep a secondary backlog of, tech debt, minor improvement work, because they're well aware that they could pull something, and then at the last minute something unplanned does show up after all. So they need to be able to drop the thing they've just started and deal with the unplanned work.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of strategies for it. If all of your work is unplanned, then you wouldn't want to use Scrum. You'd want to use Kanban, and you'd want it to be recognized that you start work on the next most important thing as soon as your capacity frees up. And she says a lot more about it in the book, and I'd urge you to go and read the book to find out more about that. The fourth one, conflicting priorities. Gosh, this is a favorite. How many times have you guys ever heard a poor, long-suffering product owner complain that all of the stakeholders that supply them with work insist that their work is number one priority?
Did we hear any of it? No,
I think we might have heard something like that once or twice. Absolutely. And yet, of course, if you do try and do multiple number one priorities, you've once again caused too much work in progress because you're working on more than one thing at a time. That leads to all of the problems to do with task switching and Lord knows what. And of course, it then defers actually getting to validate your assumptions of value about any of those supposed number one priorities. So it very much points to the need to have, if you're working in a situation like that, to actually organize getting all of your stakeholders into a room, to run some kind of exercise, to actually establish what the relative value for the relative cost is for everything, so you can prioritize.
Right. And I think the one of the things I tell most of my stakeholders there is like, if you make everything important and number one, then you don't care what they deliver.
Yeah.
Then the delivery team will deliver the easiest thing that they can do.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
It should be okay with you.
Yes. Oh, you're right. I mean, it starts to open up those cans of worms. Like, well, if they're all number one priority and you're keeping an eye on it, the chances are that you're then going to end up with a team who are gaming at their metrics.
Exactly.
So it looks like they're making progress. And then we end up with the old, watermelon project. It's green on the outside, but it's red on the inside and always has been.
Yeah.
So, there's all kinds of problems. It's something... She talks about some of the quite subtle things that usually aren't actually presented in something like certified Scrum Master training or something like that. Things like understanding cost of delay. If you've ever read Don Reinertson's book, Product Development Flow, which, good Lord, I mean, it's a very dense book, but oh my, you want to sleep with it under your pillow. And he is absolutely clear that if you only took one thing away from that book, it's the cost of delay.
Yeah.
So if you can actually spend a little bit of time taking a look at the work that you're going to do and what would it cost to not do it? I mean, there's all kinds of factors that come into that. I remember an app that was being created for the Super Bowl. And so, if you were 2 days late for that, it's useless to you.
Yeah.
So in that particular case, it made a lot of sense to rush the app out. It wasn't particularly well built. There was a whole bunch of technical debt in it, but that's the kind of debt that you borrow because it gets paid back very quickly.
Right.
There's other kinds of cost of delay where it can be things like opportunity cost. It could simply be that you're now paying people to be sat in their seats working on the wrong things slowly, And a very simple way of describing it is, let's say you have 6 1-month projects and everybody insists that theirs is important and that you make a start on it right away. Well, if you're going to do that with the churn that will happen from task switching, those 6 1-month projects are probably going to take 8 or 9 months, even if they really were 1-month projects.
Right.
The alternative is that you could go, look, guys, if you could only have one of these projects, pick one, and we'll do that one first, and then you'll get something valuable with you inside a month, then something else valuable inside 2 months, and then something else, and so on and so on and so on, as opposed to nothing valuable until they're all done in 8 or 9 months' time.
Right. Yeah.
It's not terribly difficult when you actually break it down, but I get it. The people who are going, mine's more important than yours, they actually think it is. You have to have some sympathy for them. It's often driven by those lovely little dysfunctions like, cost-based accounting.
Yeah. Yeah.
When everybody has their little fiefdom of budget and they want to defend it, then they want to make sure that their work gets done. It's extraordinary how few organizations have heard of alternatives such as throughput accounting, which can help you manage all of that. But also, exercises like something that when I finally figured out to do this, it took the quality of what I could provide for my clients up to a whole other level. When I figured out that you could use team-based estimation, where you lay your cards out along a table, and if it's bigger, it goes to the right. If it's smaller, it goes to the left. If things move around, you take them out. You could use that for value.
Right.
I'll tell the story because it's so great. I was at a client about 3 years ago when I was approached by a product manager and program manager, and they were like, look, we're kind of in a bit of trouble. Last year, we never really got a plan even in place. And, executive management ended up pretty mad at us. And so for the coming year, for our group, they've pretty much made it a mandate that we have to put a plan in front of them that they can have some faith in. And there are some nasty implications if we can't do that. So, okay, well, here's what I suggest you do. We're going to need just an hour, and I want you to get all of the stakeholders for your organization's work, your group's work, and just get them into the room for that hour and print out your backlog at epic level. So, big chunks of work. And they're like, okay, well, we can do that. And they printed out, I think it was something like 26, 27 backlog items.
Mm-hmm.
And we had about 25 people in the room. And so I spent a few minutes just explaining what we were going to do and then went ahead and did it. The first person picked up the first item and just placed it on the edge of this big, long table. We chose the meeting room carefully to have a big, long table. The next person picked up the next item, wasn't quite sure what it was, so they asked for an explanation. And the rule that I gave was, if you have to explain something, can you try and do so in one breath, please? So we got on with it.
Yeah.
And so, this happened, and they were like, oh, I understand what this is now. That's clearly more important. So I went to the right. Now, the next person could either disagree and move something, and in this case, they didn't. They took the third item and placed it relative to the others, slightly less important, so it went over to the left. And then so on to the next person, and the next, and the next, and the next, and the next. So the rule is that you can either place a new card, a new work item, or you can disagree with the placement of something and move it.
Mm.
If something gets moved more than twice, you take it out.
Interesting.
Right? And you keep going until everything on the table has stopped moving. And that it was only about 20 minutes.
Wow.
Then I took the ones that had been taken out and I went, okay, can somebody tell me, why is this one important? And that was explained. So we wrote that on a whiteboard. Why is it unimportant? And somebody chipped in and went, no, it's all right, I misunderstood it. Okay, good. So now we know why it's important. Where would we place it on the table? And we placed it. And then I did that for the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And then we went through all of the ones on the table that hadn't been taken out. And we ended up with a list of roughly 15 business values.
Mm.
And so we were then able to say, look, let's make an agreement that in this coming year, no work gets done unless it contributes to one or more of these values moving ahead. If you find some work that you believe is actually important enough to do and does not contribute to any of these values, well, we might need to bring it to this group again and agree that we found a new value.
Right.
Right. Now, having done that, we had this list of values, and then we could look at the least valuable, and we went, well, you know what? If this is the least valuable thing, can we think of anything less valuable? No, couldn't. Okay, good. Well, if we call this a 1 on the value scale, where does it become 2? And we found a spot where things were twice as valuable, and then 3 times, then 5, 8, 13, 20, 40, 100. We used a sort of
Fibonacci similar.
kind of Fibonacci, yeah.
Yeah.
We round it as it goes up so that it
Yeah.
doesn't imply precision. This is about accuracy, not precision.
Correct.
If it fits into that sort of bucket size, that's good enough.
Yeah.
So that took us about, by the time we finished, it was about 45, 50 minutes to get all of those things valued. And it was so great. The program manager came and whispered in my ear at the end of it, and he went, "Thank you. You just did in an hour what we couldn't do for all of last year. And you've no idea how much smarter everybody is in this room than they were an hour ago."
They didn't talk to each other.
They didn't talk to each other. This was literally the first time. And it was great. I wish I'd been able to video it, because you'd have seen people's faces going, oh, so Bill isn't an idiot. Oh, I've got it. He actually has a good reason for that being important. So we did that for value. Then we got engineering in. We did the same thing for the amount of effort required to do this. That took a little longer because these were epics, and some of them were going to require multiple teams to be involved with them. It took about 2.5 hours to do the same thing and to figure it out and to break some of these epics down and to size everything.
Mm-hmm.
But what we then had was a value and a size. So we could divide one by the other and find what's the best bang for the buck, all right? And then we could prioritize it by that. What that revealed was that they'd missed some dependencies because there was stuff that was, they didn't think it was very valuable, but it actually had to be done first. Dependency is a value.
Yep.
And we had a preliminary backlog. Then we booked a session. It took 6.5 hours to actually lay all of that out on a giant long wall as a product roadmap. We started off story mapping and then turned it on its side to spread it out across I think it was 6 teams that were going to be involved over the coming year. And of course, there was a lot of detail in the first quarter and very little detail in the next 3 quarters. But once they'd done that, they had a plan. They took it to management, and management basically went, "Oh, yeah, okay," and signed off on it. Quicker than they'd ever made any decision that they'd made before, because they saw what had gone into it, and they were now confident that they could start working on the highest value, smallest thing right away.
Yep.
And so even if all of this stuff did not get finished by the end of the year, what had been finished by the end of the year was all high value, finished and delivered.
And everybody had already signed into it, so they owned
Absolutely. They were all involved with the decision making.
Exactly.
It's kind of become my go-to way of getting this stuff done. Do the value first, then do the size, help the product owners break everything down into actual stories that are thin slices rather than components. And then you can really do a wonderful job. And as I was reading the book that we started talking about, Making Work Visible, I found that what Dominica Diamandis had done, Dominica de Grandis, is basically laid out within the book a bunch of explanations and then a bunch of nice little exercises that can essentially lead people to a point of going, oh, that's why you would want to do all of this stuff. That's why you might want to learn how Scrum works. That's why you might want to learn how Kanban works. That's why you might want to have a cadence of meetings. That's why you might actually want to take into account the planning onion and plan at a granularity appropriate for the timescale concerned. That's why you might want to do all of this stuff, because it's not overhead.
Correct.
It's what actually deals with all of the mayhem and dysfunction that is most people's normal workplace.
And then make it visible to them sooner than later.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, she doesn't actually draw the distinction between transparency and visibility, but it's kind of in there. I mean, what we're dealing with is empirical process control. There's 2 kinds of process: defined processes. So if you're, running a manufacturing plant that's making boxes of cookies, do what you did last time, right? There's a defined process control. But most of what we're working on, by its very nature, you've never done it before.
Right.
If you've done it before, you'd use that. And because you've never done it before, there's going to be bits where you don't know what you don't know. And so it's highly empirical. You've kind of got to figure it out. And the pillars for understanding that, the things on which it all rests, are transparency, inspection, and adaptation. Now, transparency doesn't just mean visibility. Visibility means you can see what's going on. If you just say visibility, what I've seen happen is that people just deal with what's on the surface. And often things like sort of management philosophy and the subtle stuff that's going on in the social space, the stuff between people's ears and between people, gets missed. And what I love about this book is that it actually addresses a lot of the stuff where you can make that stuff come to the surface and go and become actually visible. So now you have got transparency. You can see through to the bottom of the lake rather than just see the stuff that's died and floated to the surface.
Right.
Oh, well, that's a terrible analogy. I just thought of that, but I'm using that again. That's great.
Oh, I never heard that analogy, but that's pretty cool.
There you go. I just made that one up on the spot. You can use that, but but if you can't see what's going on, then you can't inspect it to see how it's going or adapt to it. And you want to be able to do that quickly in short cycles so that you can steer your way to success, because we are, by the very nature of our work, making it up as we go along, right?
That's true.
So that's why this has now become one of my favorite go-to books. I mean, I have a library of Agile books and publications that's approaching 500 titles now.
Oh my goodness.
But there's a top 5, and I think this is going to be one of them.
So I definitely plan to read that cover to cover now.
Oh, I very highly recommend it. And it's a delightful read. I mean, she's a great author. This is not a dry technical book. This is actually kind of fun. Very highly recommend it.
We will definitely put a link in the podcast notes for our audience.
Do. Very good. So,
Great.
While you have me, is there anything else that you think would be of interest for us to talk about? Have you got anything that came out of what I was just saying about that sort of popped up for you? We've got a bit of time. Let's use it. It'd be fun.
Sure. I think one of the what I liked about your the anecdotes of that making it visible. I think one of the things that you mentioned is what are these implications beyond just making it visible? So are there any things that you would like to touch on as to after you make it visible?
Right. It's very good, isn't it? Once you can actually see what's going on, then there's that now what moment. Well, I mean, very much one of the things that we all learn as coaches is that there's a range of appropriate intervention. What do I mean by that? I mean that at one end of the scale, sometimes all we are doing is monitoring process, right? The stuff going on, and we're just keeping an eye on it. Then that might actually ramp up to something like some form of facilitation, where other people's input is definitely required, and we're there to guide it. Then there might be training where we are actually experts at the front of the room, but often train by leading people through within guide rails. Sometimes it's by actually, delivering our expertise. There's then coaching where once people have been introduced to new ideas, we can actually support them as they grow some muscle around it. Within the world of education, this is called the zone of proximal development, ZPD, which is that zone where people can't quite do it on their own, but with some kind of support they can. And then there's, the far extreme, those situations where we're speaking at a meetup or at a conference, we're delivering a keynote. It's all about our expertise, and the other people are just sitting there basically soaking it up, busy doing nothing. So when something comes to the surface and becomes visible, we have to select from that range as to what kind of intervention would then be appropriate. Is it something where now people have seen it, you can stand back and go, well, what are you going to do about that? And let them come up with something and try something. It can be helpful if you're using something like the Cynefin sense-making framework, where you can actually look at what's come up and see whether it's something that's now patently obvious, in which case any idiot can work out what to do with it, right? If it's obvious, it's obvious. and you can apply some kind of best practice? Or is it something that's a bit more complicated where, thank goodness, we've got a team of trained engineers here who have a whole bunch of different strategies, tactics, techniques, languages, skills that they could apply to this problem, select one that works and use it? Or is it something that's complex where actually you can't really tell how this is going to go? So you're going to have to set up some parallel experiments.
Exactly.
To see which fail, which are dangerous, and you need to roll back, which might succeed, and you could then exploit and start to use those.
Yeah, it's a pivot and scale strategy.
Yes, exactly. So making something just plain visible is half of it. Well, it's in fact considerably less than half of it. The whole point of Agile and the frameworks that apply Agile thinking is to surface dysfunction, to show people what's not working so they can do something about it. And you have to get very good indeed at showing people their dirty laundry and dealing with that. The whole point of making things visible, and again, the way how Domenica has written this book is just so charming, that it will bring stuff to the surface, bring it to people's attention, so they can actually do something about it. And she offers a whole bunch of techniques for doing something about it.
That's great. Well, I think you have actually energized us.
You're
to
good.
Get to that book. I'm quite excited to look at this for sure.
There you go. And like I say, I've only got roughly another 500 books that I could share with you, so could be in business for a while yet.
Yeah, we'll be sure to link to the book in the podcast notes.
Yes, do. I don't get a kickback from Domenica, but I absolutely couldn't recommend this book highly enough.
Excellent.
Very good. So, also, how can our listeners get in touch with you if
I would
they
think
wish?
Probably the easiest way is either through LinkedIn, Andrew Webster. It's a little black and white picture of me. I think the email address that I use on LinkedIn and through which they can also get hold of me is andrew@wisdomat.work. That's a difficult email address. I get it. Andrew, my first name, @wisdom@ all one word .work. Andrew@wisdom@work. Because that's actually how I now describe my work. Rather than just being agile, it's about wisdom at work. There you go.
Great. Thanks again, Andrew.
My absolute pleasure. It's been a delight. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk about this. I this is really what I'm here for. So I'm touched and delighted that you asked me. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
All right. We'll see everyone next week. Okay. Bye, folks.
Bye-bye.